Welcome back, everybody, to Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. I'm Judy Weigel, your host and amicable divorce expert. Why? Because that's all I do, amicable divorces. Today we have a very interesting person. She is an attorney. Her name is Samantha McBride. She's in family law. And she's a millennial. So if any of you have listened to a previous episode that I recorded titled Why Marry, and it was with a Gen X person who was 34 years old, and she was giving her views on marriage and the relevancy of it in this day and age. But I met Samantha recently at a seminar on cultural competency for everybody in the divorce business. Samantha was on a panel that talked about millennials and divorce. So here's Samantha first before I introduce you to her and ask her some questions. Samantha is perceptive, detail-oriented, and kind. Now, so far, Samantha, this is written like a millennial's biography. Do you know that?
Yes.
Okay, good. A little intentional maybe, but as I read, Samantha's grandfather was a Superior Court judge in Orange County, and that's where Samantha's practice is. She has said that he helped raise her to be competitive, yet honest. Another aspect of millennials. When we think of attorneys, we have a very interesting perception and fear of attorneys insofar as money is connected. So we hopefully will bring that out. Something else I found interesting in your biography, Samantha, you received your bachelor's degree in philosophy and sociology, which I am assuming, and you can speak to this, really factors into how you practice law, does it?
Absolutely.
Okay. Did you know you were going to practice law when you were an undergrad?
Yes. Yeah, I moved forward with kind of pursuing law when I was probably about 19 or 20 years old.
Okay, and you are how old now?
30.
Okay, very good. So not that long ago, but this was purposeful, and that's very interesting. So she is an associate attorney with the firm Holstrom, Block, and Park in Costa Mesa, right?
We have 5 offices. We have an office in Newport Beach, Corona, Riverside, San Diego, and Marietta.
Okay, this is excellent. And at the end of this, you're going to give your contact information
so
people can get in touch with you. Continuing on with the biography, which I just love, she's known at the firm for her exceptional writing skills and strong work ethic. Again, interesting millennial description. I also found this interesting. Samantha practices in divorce, child custody support, and restraining orders. And unfortunately, restraining orders and family violence are part of a lot of divorces, aren't they?
It is unfortunate and true. It is something that has to be dealt with very delicately and adds an extra layer to any family law matter.
Especially if the goal is to get someplace towards amicable.
Right.
Okay, very good. Let's see, moving on. Oh, and then other than law, you as a person, you work with big brothers and sisters of Inland Empire to help their mission to transform the lives of children through professionally supported one-to-one mentoring relationships. And you volunteer each year with the Orangewood Children's Foundation to help put at-risk teens into this really cool-sounding event, Belle of the Ball.
It's an amazing event.
And it uplifts them, and it shows them something they can strive for, another side of life, right?
Exactly.
Because when you're an at-risk teen, your whole life is different than just kids going to school, maybe dealing with divorce, but whole different ball of wax, right?
Right.
And lastly, you spend your free time hiking, running, playing soccer, and spending time with friends and family. And you are considered a rising star in the legal community. And after listening to your panel discussion 2 weeks ago, I support that as well. I can see that. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
All right. Now, so you're going to help our listeners quite a lot. You're a millennial attorney and you're going to speak about divorce. But first, your personal experience with divorce. Were your parents divorced?
Yes, my parents were divorced, and I do think it is very important to talk about everyone's personal experience because we're all people, we've all gone through a lot, and everyone has a different experience, and I want to bring my side out and share my experience because I believe that people often view attorneys as these figures and don't understand that they have had these real life experiences too. So I truly understand the pain surrounding divorce, and I understand why moving towards an amicable resolution is often the only real goal that should be in place. I was about 21 or 22 when my parents formally separated, although when I was in my late teenage years, the separation started.
Meaning two households?
It was on and off two households. It would kind of, there was periods of reconciliation involved. I have two wonderful, loving parents, one sister. My parents were born in the early 1960s and were married for about 30 years before they finally divorced. I had a very happy childhood, but at some point they grew apart and it was hard for our whole family. Although I was an older teen when it occurred, it still affected me greatly. My sister was closer to being out of the house at that time, so I don't know that she had the same personal experience as I did with it, but divorce is hard, even amicable ones. So for me, the goal has always been to, based on my own personal experience, make sure that everyone that is affected by divorce gathers together to positively move forward with finding kind of a new normal.
So was your sister living in the house during the period where there was separation, reconciliation, or was she already out?
She was out.
So it was just you that lived through this. How did you react to the emotional juggling match?
It was quite a juggling match, and I think that I reacted as good as you can in a completely new environment, but you're dealing with a lot of highs and lows. You're dealing with trying to figure out where you're going to stay or what a new household would look like, where that new household would be. You're dealing with emotions back and forth and not really anticipating that this would occur while also still trying to live your life, right? You're trying to plan to go to college. You're trying to plan your future. And so this is a balancing act. And I think that is true with almost every divorce is no one's really ready for it. Even if they try to plan for it, your life is still going on. So juggling that can be difficult. And for me, being there for my parents also meant being there as their child, but also being there as their family member and friend and somewhat of a conduit between the two.
So in the times where there were two households, there had to be a co-parenting plan, correct?
Well, I think there was, but for me, because I was getting towards the end and nearing majority and going off to college, there wasn't a formal court order put in place or anything like that. It was more where I wanted to be, which was with both parents, but it was kind of me jumping back and forth.
So did they allow you to make the decisions where you wanted to be?
Yes.
Exceptional. Just a little aside, my sister, when she got divorced, she had 3 small children, 3, 5, and 7, completely contentious. They definitely had to hire lawyers, and they were in court a lot. But the one good thing they did, and miraculously so, they let the children decide exactly where they wanted to go and when. They didn't have to all be together. The parents did not complain. They lived 5 minutes apart, not LA. So you can live 5 minutes apart and have it be 5 miles in other cities. That's the one good thing they did. And even though the children were really small, they had control by being allowed to make those decisions. Can you just speak to control a little bit, how it affected you positively or negatively?
It's really empowering. When people go through divorce, and when my parents went through divorce, and my friends and family share in this, everyone plays a part in it. And so although it may be a husband and wife or mom and dad separating, there's other players in the mix. And so I think too often it's glossed over that it's just between two parties. It's really not. It's an entire family unit, friends, and even to an extension, coworkers. Everyone gets affected. So being able to have a say and not necessarily dictate every outcome, but being able to have value assigned to yourself, that your input is meaningful and that you get to make decisions as it relates to your life is important. And I think put me in a position where I could really process how a new family unit was going to kind of be built out of this and successfully maintain that through the next decade and the rest of my life.
And lastly, the behavior of your parents in front of you, because as we all know, there's that section in the child custody portion of a settlement agreement that says neither parent can make negative comments about each other in front of their children. Did your parents play nice, so to speak? Were they cordial and respectful of each other in front of you?
They were. They really were. And to both of their credit, they made sure that we all understood that they still loved each other and that they were together for so long. And although they had chosen sort of a separate route for each other, we were still all a family. So that's a credit definitely to both of them, to then, be at my sister's wedding together, sitting at the same table. All of those things really go towards not even just who they are as people, but how the impact of an amicable divorce can have on the rest of the structure of your relationships. Because after you get divorced, what next? When you have children, you still have to be around one another. So even if it's finalized, it's really not logistically, even if it is legally.
Yes, absolutely. There will always be family events that bring everybody together. And so co-parenting is one aspect of a divorce, but then there are blended families that come after that. There are family events, and holding in anger, blaming each other, it's just so destructive and doesn't have to be.
Right. And for us, both my parents moved on, and now I consider both of their significant others members of my family. My mom didn't actually remarry. My dad did, but my mom's significant other I consider a second father figure to me. He is amazing, and it really has turned into, although it was a building process, a positive relationship for everyone.
It's great. I love hearing these stories, and so much credit to your parents for the way they handled themselves, and even that they were so thoughtful that they tried to reconcile. I think that's great, because sometimes people just need a breather to reorganize their thinking, get some therapy, and then really decide and process what the right life decision is for them. So now let's go to your life as an attorney, if we can, a millennial attorney, and I say that for a purpose. So what made you go into family law?
So I've always wanted to really pursue some sort of legal career, and that solidified in college. However, when I was in law school, I was not sure which area I wanted to go into. I had a grandpa who was a judge and some other family members who have also are attorneys.
What area of law was Granddad in?
He was in criminal law.
Okay.
And that's a very tough job, and he did very, very good things for the community with that. But for me, it just didn't fit the bill. when I was in law school, I started working at a domestic violence clinic. And we would put on workshops for victims of domestic violence and help them fill out their paperwork. And we would work with the shelters to make sure that they had the education available to get them access to courts. And that really was the most meaningful work that I've done. I loved that, and it sparked my passion for family law for all that it is.
This is excellent, and ergo why restraining orders came up as an area of specialty, because it takes a lot of finesse to work with that. I mean, you really do have to have like ingrained therapist leanings, so to speak, I think, to be sensitive, but yet to get the job done and keep everybody safe, right?
I agree.
So does your age and life view as a millennial factor into your representation of clients? How so, if it does?
I think absolutely. I was raised in an age where our parents and millennials in general were baby boomers. We saw a lot of marriage. We saw a lot of divorce. And I think that has impacted how I view marriage and how I view divorce. As a practicing attorney, I've also grown up in sort of this digital atmosphere where technology runs a lot and information is readily accessible. So there's, as I'm seeing in my practice, somewhat of a new age of clients coming in, and their cases are really run by social media and by kind of an expansion of the internet in general.
How do you mean? Explain further.
So an example would be in a child custody and visitation agreement, you have one parent who may be dissatisfied with what the other parent is doing. And so that parent makes the unfortunate choice to take to the internet and to disseminate sensitive information or their disfavor regarding their children. And it really happens more often than you would think. And it is a very unfortunate thing, and it is kind of a new area, kind of a new subset of child custody that I see a lot of. There is comments, there are pictures, and it can get really ugly really quick. And so it's another kind of part of my practice to make sure that everyone is really educated on what a negative impact some of these instant kind of gratification postings can have on the pace of your entire co-parenting relationship. There are things that should be kept between parents, and often they're not. So really, from a positive point of view, it is focusing people into understanding that this is really about the children, and we need to come from a child-centric kind of point of view rather than who is right, who is wrong, who should quote unquote win this battle, because it's not about mom or dad having custody. It's about the child, what's in the child's best interest, and how are any of these actions going to negatively affect that child.
When you talk to parents about not using social media as a sounding board for their emotions, do they accept that? Do they understand that? How successful are you able to be? And are there negative impacts if you have to go to court with this behavior? Does it factor into support at all?
So whenever I talk to any of my clients, although sometimes court happens as a necessity, the reality is the goal is to not get there. The goal is to educate your client that these are the kind of things that wouldn't go well for you if you went to court, but also, more importantly, aren't going to help your situation as a parent. So educating kind of both in logistically what is in the best interest of your child, and then also integrating what the law would hold for you if you move forward with court has been pretty successful. Unfortunately, some people have to learn it the hard way, but there is substantial exposure to posting online, even if you're quote unquote right in what you think, because you can be perceived by not just the general public, but if you had to move forward with court, a judicial officer, as being kind of contra to co-parenting. It's not about who's right. It's about who's willing to parent and put those sort of personal things aside for the benefit of the child. So it does create a huge exposure, and I think that there is a lot of education that needs to be spent and a lot of time that I spend with my clients to make sure that they understand the ramifications of those potential actions.
You know, this is interesting. It just occurred to me while I was listening to you talk. Now, I'm a baby boomer. We didn't have that technology. In fact, I remember when the first fax machine was introduced in the late 80s. But since we didn't have that, I am not prone to sharing my feelings on a one-to-many basis. But there are younger people who feel this is normal and don't really think of the damage, correct?
Absolutely.
And even when we say, can you restrict your Twitter account for a while, or why did you post for the first time that you're seeing somebody else before anybody else in your immediate family, like your spouse or children, even knew it? And they're shocked that that's an issue.
It's a major issue. And everyone that really heavily partakes in social media that was a millennial, I would say, is raised, even if you aren't into the idea of social media, you know that all your peers are. And we were really raised where that is how you know information about each other. And a lot of it is somewhat of a false reality, but I know that, you know, my friend from high school got married and lives in New York. I know that from Facebook. I don't know that from talking to them directly all the time. So there is this kind of outward network where everyone is placing their perceptions of themselves out into the world. We got engaged. Here's a picture. Similarly, we have to notify the world that we're now divorced. And so it becomes this kind of avenue for, I feel a need to tell everyone an update about myself, not always productive.
Generally not productive. Okay, so do you think that you or your firm or law in general, are you attracting a younger client base? You know, it's very interesting because like begets like, energy begets energy. This is my metaphysical view of life. But do you find you're getting younger cases assigned even by your firm to you?
Yes, I do have a mix of cases, but I would say that there is an influx of millennials that I represent, and it's not to say that a different generation couldn't adequately do the same job, but I do think that I agree with you that I understand the intricacies of how somebody could alter a text message for the purpose of trying to hurt someone in court. And I understand the fast-paced nature of communication, which millennials are really cling to, quick text messages, quick emails, and the like.
As a divorce attorney and as a millennial, what is your personal and then professional view of marriage in terms of the relevancy of the institution, it's being questioned, and how it should be approached?
So from a personal point of view, although I haven't been married, I absolutely believe in marriage. I have always been raised to not feel that I needed to be married as a prerequisite, but that personally I would love to get there or be there and be in marriage if I could find the right person. But from a professional point of view, I think obviously my personal point of view handles into that. I still believe in marriage, but from a professional point of view, it's a financial contract and there needs to be some education surrounding that. The reason that you marry maybe for love, maybe for something else, and that is personal to each individual. But knowing what you are doing when you're marrying before you marry, I think is so important, because I think it helps you establish expectations. If you know the law and you know what you're doing by virtue of getting married, as opposed to just, planning your wedding dress, which is all amazing things and that's great. But if you know the law behind what happens contractually with the state of California, where we are, when you marry, it creates, in my opinion, a better strategy for success. And in the unfortunate event that your relationship starts to dissolve, it also creates a baseline for where you go from there, because you knew it all along.
And you said something so important. Please flesh this out just a little bit. Marriage is a financial relationship. People don't understand that until they're ready to get divorced, and they say, why is this all about money?
Absolutely. And again, that kind of goes to the education of it. When you're getting married, you are getting married for your own reasons, but you're also contractually in the state of California becoming financial partners to one another. You have a fiduciary duty is created. You have certain obligations that go along with that. When you acquire assets, when you incur debt, certain things happen, because now in the state, California is a community property state. So you are now contractually looked at as a married man and woman, or as a married woman and woman, as the case may be.
As two financially connected people. And that's why we get marriage licenses at courthouses, correct?
Correct.
Yes. And so I never questioned that myself until I worked in family law. And then I said, well, of course, why else would you? I thought it was just for the census to keep society organized and to keep track of people. But it's really more than that.
Absolutely.
It's a contractual relationship, which, by the way, I did some research on this, and it was only the mid-19th century that marriage licenses started evolving and being created. It wasn't forever.
Right.
So very good. Okay, now let's go back to, as a millennial, so we're on the personal side here, what are the millennials' views, or your family or your friends' views, of when you should get married? What are the conditions that would be perfect for marriage?
So I would say, and this is obviously a generalization, but there is a push to wait for marriage, depending, and waiting may be till you're 20. It doesn't necessarily mean until you're older in life, but there has been a push towards prioritizing other things in life before marriage. Marriage in a millennial age is not normally a necessity for your self-identity. Your career is, or what you want to do in life, even non-professionally, traveling, doing these other things. And yes, finding a partner is important, but it is not a stigma, I would say, across the board in a millennial age that you aren't married at X age. What's wrong with you? That's not kind of the general consensus, I would say.
So when you were younger and graduated from law school and making plans for your life, in terms of marriage, did you kind of set what you felt for you was a good age that made sense to you? Did you look at it that way?
I think I had always been very focused on getting my career together, getting through school, and starting to create a family after that kind of point in time. So I don't know that I assigned an age to it, but surely when I was in college and law school, that was the last thing on my mind.
Yes. Okay. And then what does the millennial family model look like, if that has changed at all from the baby boomer model?
I think
which is women didn't work, by the way.
Right.
Generally.
I think that there are quite a few trends. One is the waiting to get married, and I think I might be the poster child for that. So I haven't been married, as I said, but I was in a very long-term relationship with a wonderful man for about 10 years. We cohabitated together, we shared finances, we had a dog, we had a cat, we had a little family, but we never got married. And, we didn't think too much about it. It just wasn't a priority. And I think we assumed that at some point we would get married, but we always had established expectations throughout our relationship. So when our relationship naturally dissolved, it was kind of similar to my parents because we were so amicable. We had these established expectations because of our education and what it could mean. We knew that we hadn't chose to contract with the state to have financial obligations for one another.
i.e. marriage contract.
Right. But we also knew that it could come to an end. And when it did, we really did a good job of maintaining that same amicability. We're very, very good friends to this day. And I think that there is kind of a push towards cohabitation and maybe not jumping into marriage that maybe all of our other parents did and we saw.
Little teeny phrase in what you just said, we knew that there could be an end. Did you ever how did you talk about it then in that relationship?
I think we financially just established our expectations based on what we had, and we never came at it from this pessimistic point of view of, oh, if we're not together tomorrow or anything like that. But it was always just established. This was what I had. This was what he had. This is what we had together. And these were the joint decisions we were making. And so we made a joint decision to dissolve the relationship as well. So that didn't happen overnight, but managing who's going to pay that bill and who's going to pay this bill and who's going to care for our animals and how is this going to work and how are we going to be able to create a different normal. And for us, I still consider him a very close friend and by extension, somewhat of a family member, but we really just went into it from the point of view of we're not going to allow this to become a contentious, argumentative, bad, dissolved relationship.
So wonderful to hear. How did you talk about children during that time?
Children was something that we had planned after I had finished my education. So we were kind of getting in the next steps towards that, although he had to travel a lot for work. And so it kind of kept getting pushed back. And it was, I would say, a priority for both of us, but not an immediate priority. So it was somewhat always on the back burner.
And with younger couples, millennial couples, who are going to get married, where do prenups factor in?
Prenups factor in quite a bit depending on where you're at in your relationship, what assets you may have incurred prior to your potential marriage, and what sort of expectations you want to create for yourself. I always encourage, and I think that there will be more of a trend towards prenups, millennials and people in general to, again, educate themselves on what a marital contract is. Because when you say prenup, what triggers to me is education surrounding what kind of contract we're going to get into before we get into marriage. So whether you look into a prenup and realize maybe this isn't what works for us, or you look into a prenup and say, I can craft the law how we want it in this way, either are perfect scenarios for me as long as there's that education involved before you enter into that contract.
When people come here and want me to mediate deal points for the prenup, and then they bring them to attorneys to write it up with all the evolving case law, the one thing I always say is, well, let's just start with what you have now as assets and what you have now as debt. Mm-hmm. Let's get that on the paper. Now, can any of these turn into what we call quasi-community property? And so that's something to think about. And then, and this is where I would like you to speak to, do you address for the future how they want to create community property?
You can. You can craft quite a few things into a prenuptial agreement that you probably can't even imagine. However, it is important to note with prenuptial agreements, there's a lot of writings and a lot of documents that need to be effectuated to make them stand up if you need them later. And they need to be conscionable both at the time of execution and at the time of enforcement, making them somewhat of a tricky document. I'm not trying to scare anyone out of a prenup. I think prenups are great contractual agreements, but it is important to make sure that you kind of have all of the parts together when you enter into that agreement, because if you don't, then you might not have been able to contemplate that agreement on the onset.
We know that we can't wipe away child support in anything that has to do with children in prenups, but spousal support is arbitrary and you can choose. Do you find that in millennial couples both people work? Is that that's more of a trend now that
Yes.
both women and men work, or both parties, because we can have gay and lesbian couples as well. So do you see the contentious issue of spousal support? And I say contentious because, there are a couple things that everybody deals with in the family law business that are hot red topics, and spousal support just happens to head that list. Has that concept of spousal support changed at all that you can see with millennial couples?
I think it is honestly too soon to tell for the most, because most millennials right now are entering into marriages, and the millennials that are exiting marriages are barely meeting the 10-year mark, if that. So it's kind of a forecast, because the marriages that we are seeing that aren't successful in millennials, at least right now, are millennials that are coming out of it with less of an expectation of at least long-term support. So support's certainly on the table, but the long-term support and need for continued financial relief is not something that we're necessarily seeing as the norm right now, although I do anticipate it to be a major issue.
And just to clarify for people if they don't know, when Samantha talked about the 10-year mark in California, go ahead and explain that. What is the significance?
In California, when a court is awarding spousal support, or just under the family code in general, there are a couple of different designations that are given. A short-term marriage is considered anything under 10 years presumptively, and a long-term marriage is anything over 10 years presumptively. Those presumptions are generalizations, but how you are entitled to support is going to vary vastly if you're near the 9-10 year mark. In California, as a general basis, if spousal support would be awarded by a court, you're looking at closer to half the length of the relationship, if at all. This obviously depends on if both parties are working, what's the established standard of care, and quite a few other factors. Long-term support is normally awarded closer to after the 10-year mark. It also doesn't mean forever, but it is a different standard.
Okay, great. I just wanted people to understand, because since spousal support is one of the most sensitive issues, we'll put it like that, in most marriages, especially when women are out earning men. Oh, that takes on a whole nature and character when women are expected to pay spousal support. Have you found that as well?
Absolutely. And I will also say that it is a very hot topic across the board, but what is so important to note is that even if on the surface two cases or two sets of couples appear to be statistically the same, X earner, it doesn't mean that that is the same order for support. It's a fact basis, very sensitive, centric issue. So I get, well, my friend down the street got X amount. And I would encourage everyone to resist that as a temptation, although it's important to have networks and groups of people, and I encourage that. It is also important to note that we as individuals are different, our marriages are different, the statistics are different, and so it really has to go on a case-by-case basis.
I am so happy you brought that up. I really am, because that is the natural tendency. You will talk to friends and family, and everybody will exchange their experiences with each line item that factors into the divorce, and I quite frequently get the same thing you get as a mediator, you get it as an attorney. And that is, but I don't understand why I'm only getting this little bit because my friend got, and I said, oh my gosh, unless you were part of that marriage and saw those financial disclosures and had the other issues that would be a backdrop to the discussion of the support, unless you're a fly on the wall, we're talking about apples and oranges.
Right.
It's just not a number. You get to a number by so many different levels of consideration, right?
Absolutely.
So in conclusion, I can't believe our time has gone so fast because you are fascinating. I love that you came here to speak with us. So in conclusion, regardless of millennials or any other age group, because you're a divorce attorney, give some tips on how people should successfully and positively plan for divorce.
I think my first tip, and probably the most important tip, is communication. That can solve so many problems. Get on the same page as your spouse or soon-to-be ex-spouse and see how far apart you guys are. Often you're not as far apart as you may think, but at least you have a point in time or a set of agreements that you know to be true, and you then know where you can navigate your case. And then my second tip is to educate yourself, to the extent that you're not, on the law and the way that it works and how your expectations and your spouse's expectations can meld into the law and figure out how you guys can kind of create a new union.
Beautiful. And I want to say this. When people talk about having amicable divorces, and they call me because I'm not a lawyer and I file instead of lawyers filing, I do not give legal advice. I do not give people their legal rights. I do not educate them about law. I always say, I really, really want you to each speak to an attorney, or if you're committed to and don't need attorney representation all the way through, see if you can both go to the same attorney and just listen to the law, neutrally provided. And don't think, because they do, Samantha, that it is disloyal, but we said we weren't going to see attorneys. No, that's, I'm telling you and everybody, that is the wrong way to think. You need to be educated about the law, and then you can bend it if you want to mutually, correct?
I completely agree. I couldn't agree more. And I can tell you, for every person that calls me and says, I have a problem and I need you to help me with a solution, there's 2 or 3 that already have the solution in their arsenal, and they can do this without the court process. They just need to have some affirmation on what the law is and where you would go from there. So I think knowing the law puts you in a position where you can then meet with a mediator and jointly say, this is what we could get, this doesn't make sense for our family, these are our expectations, and here's how we are going to take the financial contract that we entered into, whether or not we knew we did, and we are going to dissolve it now in a meaningful way, how we want to dissolve it.
Perfect. And that is exactly the way it should be. And you should not be relying on your mediators if they're non-attorneys. And even if they are, you should not be relying on your mediators to teach you the law, because you can easily sound not neutral. It really has to come from a bona fide attorney, and then you are serving yourselves beautifully. Now, how can people get in touch with you, Samantha?
I just want to say, too, thank you so much for having me here. We are a law firm, Holstrom, Block & Park. If you want to get in contact with us, you can go to hbplaw.com. We do offer free telephone consultations, and I would encourage anyone that is curious about educating themselves on the law or just has a question, whether it's a mediated route or an unfortunate litigation route, give us a call so that we can go through a telephone consultation with you and kind of explain to you what your rights are, what the facts of your case are, and how you can make the decision that is right for you.
That's beautiful. And say the website one more time, please.
hbplaw.com.
hbplaw.com. Samantha, thank you so much. Eternally grateful for the time you've given us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And for all of you, thank you for joining us again on Constructive Uncoupling. I'm Judy Weigel, your host. You can reach me at Judy, Judy, at constructiveuncoupling.com. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you next week.